Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. I'm Rowena Itchon, Senior Vice President, and with me is Tim Anaya, Senior Director of Communications. So Tim, the gas tax rebate continues to rage on. Republicans want to suspend the gas tax. Dems want to provide a $400 rebate. Others want a $200 rebate. And still others want it universal. And then someone like me would be included in that, someone who doesn't have a car. And then still others want to have some kind of income threshold. What's the latest? What are you hearing?
Well, I think the key thing is everybody wants to do something. And I can't underscore what a big political movement these gas price increases have been, because the Democrats routinely oppose and for decades have opposed any effort to lower the gas tax. Even there was a proposal I worked on years ago that has never been resolved to get rid of the double taxation of gasoline, because, you have the sales price of the gasoline, then you have the excise tax, and then the state sales tax is applied to that combined amount. So you're effectively taxing taxes. Now, that wouldn't be a huge amount. I think it's like 3 or 4 cents a gallon, but still, we shouldn't be taxed on taxes we're paying. But for years, they routinely block that. So now that we're basically in this era of, I'll see your gas tax cut and I'll raise you a gas tax rebate, that's an interesting dynamic that we're in right now. Speaker Rendon and President Pro Tem Tony Atkins, not a month ago, said, we are very concerned about any effort, first advocated by the governor, to have a gas tax holiday or gas tax reduction, because they're concerned about all the money we're supposedly spending on these transportation infrastructure projects. And that gas tax increase from a few years ago, you recall, was supposed to go to transportation infrastructure projects. Well, if ever there is the time to do it, now is the time to do it. We have all this money from the feds for infrastructure in the bipartisan infrastructure deal. We have a $40 billion surplus. We can backfill any money that is lost in from cutting the gas tax. And there's the reality, as Adrian Moore and Bob Poole have said, just because you have the money doesn't mean you're putting a shovel in the ground. There's a lot of other work that goes into getting these projects, quote, shovel ready. So just because you appropriated the money last year, the year before, doesn't mean that actual progress is being made. So in the end, how it shakes out is unclear, but it's pretty clear Californians are going to get some kind of relief from high gas prices. Now the debate is what form. Do we have a rebate? Do we have a gas tax holiday? Who gets it? Who benefits? Your point about people who don't own a car, they would still get it. Those are all things that we have to kick the tire around. My bet is in the end, Ro, you will get whatever rebate, because politicians love nothing more than passing out free money.
Tim, well, I haven't received any free money yet, not COVID money, not anything. So I actually disagree with you. We can have a bet on a glass of wine on this. I don't have a car, as you know, and I take Uber everywhere, and it's a lot more expensive these days to ride Uber and Lyft. I actually don't hold up much hope in getting anything, but these things affect people like me and you who are being taxed and taxed again and again. So many of us are just moving to another state, which leads me to the subject of our podcast, Californians Migrating, and they've been doing this for years now. Our panel, which is from our Ideas in Action Conference in Sacramento, we do these annually. And this panel is going to be highlighting this issue on migration. The panel includes our own Wayne Winegarden and Kerry Jackson, and they're co-authors of PRI study California Migrating, which was released late last year. And it also includes Assembly Member Vince Fong of the 34th District, Loren Kaye, President of the Foundation for Commerce and Education, and Scott Kaufman, Legislative Director for the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. So Tim, you put together this panel. It was really terrific. Give us your thoughts on their discussion.
What I thought was very interesting is they really go into, you would expect taxes are going to be the main focus of everyone's comments. But when you hear the discussion, I think it's a lot more layered and a lot more nuanced than that. And there are so many things that are pushing people to leave the state. And whatever your straw that broke the camel's back is, it's pretty clear that Sacramento is doing a pretty poor job of responding to those concerns that are pushing people to leave, or doing anything to prevent it in the first place, or heaven forbid, lure those people back. So I think even though you might have an idea of what the problems are, I think you'll find yourself learning it's a lot worse than we think.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. And here's our panel.
Our next panel discussion focuses on a growing problem for California's economy, the outflow of people, employers, jobs, and tax revenue to other states. The most dramatic evidence of this is California losing a congressional seat following the 2020 census for the very first time. Last fall, PRI released California Migrating, which documents the root causes of California's growing outmigration problem. Not surprisingly, years of policy mistakes have hindered people's ability to prosper. Dr. Wayne Winegarden and Kerry Jackson will present the key findings of this study. Wayne is a PRI Senior Fellow in Business and Economics and the Director of our Center for Medical Economics and Innovation. Kerry is a Fellow with PRI's Center for California Reform. They are both co-authors of No Way Home, Exploring California's Homeless Crisis, which was published in 2021 by Encounter Books. Kerry and Wayne will lead a distinguished panel of experts in discussing how we can stem the state's outmigration problem through free market policy reforms. Please welcome Wayne Winegarden, Kerry Jackson, and our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. If I could, if Chris would leave a business card for me before he gets out, I would appreciate it. I'll be brief and turn this over to Wayne. I want to make 3 quick points. We split the paper up into 2 sections. Essentially, I took business, Wayne took the residents leaving, and there's really no way to separate the two. But in reading what the policymakers, their response to the migration of businesses, they're in denial. And they say, well, it's just a media splash, this company, that company. And I think they're just so dedicated to their blue state policies that they can't see around this. They don't know, they don't see what they're doing. They don't see where the taxation, the regulations, they're not paying attention. They're too focused on what they're doing. Second point, Joe Vranich, excuse me. Joe Vranich, who provided some data for our study, who's been keeping up with business migrations for, I guess, 20 years, said that businesses, when they leave, the cost of doing business once they leave California drops 25 to 35%. And who wouldn't leave? And then I go back to point 1 about taxation. There just seems to be an insatiable appetite for taxes statewide. And businesses, they're not going to take that. They can't continue to make their profits. Again, who is going to, with the taxation in this state, who's going to stick around? So I said I'd be brief. I don't know if it'd be this brief. But I'm going to turn it over to Wayne.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm probably the wrong person to be introducing this panel because I actually last week just moved to California, my wife and I. So we're one of the few people going the wrong way. It was funny. We have Virginia plates. We ran into a truck driver along the way. He was asking what we're doing. I said, moving to California. He said, what are you doing that for? Everyone's going the other way. And it's funny because it's obvious to everyone. And when we were writing the paper, one of the things that occurred to me, and was actually one of the things that really inspired me about the paper, was that there is this sense of denial among the policymaking community in terms of what's behind what's going on, because it is unprecedented. I used to work with Arthur Laffer, and one of the things we always did is we followed population flows. One of his big mantras was that that's the ultimate kind of test about your environment, whether it's economics, so whatever it is. If people want to come to where you are, then you're doing something right? That's an approval. And when people are leaving, that's a signal that you're doing something wrong and that we need to change it. And yet we're burying our heads in the sand. And I don't think there's anything more kind of evident of that. A little wonkish here. There was a chart from the California Policy Lab, and they did a study showing, there's nothing wrong here. There's nothing happening here. Don't look away. And they had the chart saying there is no out-migration problem. And on the chart, you see this line, and the people leaving going up, and the people coming are going down, and they're pointing to this chart, and they're saying that there is no out-migration problem or net domestic migration problem. And I guarantee there was something they went through that showed why what they were arguing is somehow technically correct. But to anybody who's just looking at the situation, you can feel it. You can see that people are leaving, and then the reason is it's policy-induced. And that was, I think, the big theme that Kerry and I came to, is when you look at why businesses were going, why people were leaving. You go through the IRS data, and what you see is all income levels. It used to be lower income, but now it's grown. So all income levels, they're leaving, and they're leaving at greater rates. Would you look at the outflow of adjusted gross income, right? All of a sudden, because wealthier people tend not to migrate as much. For obvious reasons, right? You're settled, you have a profitable business, there's more cost to leaving. But you're seeing that flow, and so you're seeing a huge increase in adjusted gross income. Now we're starting to get into, adjusted gross income leaving. AGI is a technical term. It's how we measure income at the IRS. Basically what it's saying is that we're losing wealth. We have an income tax-based revenue system. If this continues, our ability to deal with the public pension crisis, to deal with funding roads, funding schools, all of that becomes jeopardized. So we're seeing these trends accelerating, and we can see it linked to, I think this is kind of a continuation of all the past kind of panels we've been having. If you look at criminal justice, quality of life, that's a driver. If we look at CEQA, cost of living, affordability, that's a driver. Look at taxes. That's a driver. One of the things we found, which I think is important, then I'll stop and we can bring up the panel who's got a lot of very important things to say. If you look at income, because one of the things the deniers will always say, and it's 100% correct, right? Personal income growth in California is strong. And it is. Personal income has been doing better here in California than other parts. But when you adjust that income for just two things is what we did. Adjust it for the higher taxes you pay here and the higher part of cost of living, affordability of housing. How much does it cost just to pay off your housing? Your incomes don't go, it's lower. And in fact, when you look at comparisons, look at Silicon Valley, right? You can take half the income in Austin, or close to half the income in Austin, and have just as great of quality of life. And that is kind of, I think, emblematic of what the problem is. And so what today's panel is going to start digging into what are the reasons driving this exodus, what's the policy, and most importantly, what can we do to reverse this trend, because we're not going to get that revitalization, having that migration problem end. It's all interrelated, and if we don't address that part of it, we're not going to actually have the prosperity. California, I came here because I think it is one of the greatest states. The quality of life, the weather, everything, it's better in California. And so we need to achieve that. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kerry to introduce our first panelist.
Yes, our first panelist is going to be Assemblyman Vince Fong from the 34th Assembly District. Is most of Kern County, and we were just talking a few minutes ago, Bakersfield. I did not realize it's now the 8th or 9th city in the state. So quite a difference from
what people think of Bakersfield.
Yeah. He serves as the vice chair of the Assembly Budget Committee, and as a legislator, he has helped to lead the conversation on energy dependence in California, as he should from Kern County. That's another, how much of the oil in the state comes from Kern County?
That's 75%. Well, that's 75%. The state of California is probably making.
I didn't want to, I thought a higher number, and I didn't want to come out and say that because I didn't want to be corrected, which I should have been. He has worked to develop policies that permit business expansion and enhance job opportunities for local residents. He began his career working for Congressman Bill Thomas, who was chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. For nearly a decade, he served the district as district director to House Republican leader and Congressman Kevin McCarthy. Please welcome Assemblyman Vince Fong.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate PRI for allowing me to participate. Thank you, Wayne and Kerry. Welcome to California, Wayne. You'll probably rethink that decision at some point, but we need as many people coming to California as possible. But I couldn't agree more with the findings of their study. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we probably knew a handful of people that probably left the state of California, right? For various reasons. Now, I mean, every week we probably know 5 to 10 people that are moving out of the state, and they're no longer, as stated before, they're no longer the high net worth individuals and families, right? It used to be, okay, I have a home in Colorado, I have a home in Florida, and I'm gonna end up retiring there, right? But now those on the middle class and lower economic, socioeconomic income spectrum, they're leaving the state just as fast. And it's because of all the things that I've outlined. I actually wrote a list of the crises facing the state right now. I don't think if you had told me 6 years ago that I would be serving in a time of a global pandemic, I'm not sure I would have believed you. But you've got homelessness, a massive drought, housing crisis, a supply chain crisis, electricity blackouts, workforce shortages, public safety challenges, the tax burdens and regulatory burdens of our business climate driving businesses out of the state. For us during the pandemic, we had a shortage of doctors and nurses in the Central Valley. So this is just the tip of the iceberg of the things that we're facing as a state. And the question I get the most is, well, how do you prioritize? Like, what do you prioritize in terms of dealing with these challenges? And as the vice chair of the budget committee, the answer is we have to deal with all of it. Right? Our quality of life and what's driving Californians out of the state is all of it. And people are frustrated with crime or feel safe in their street, in their neighborhoods. Add in education and the challenge in schools, and that's another crisis that we're dealing with. Right? So these are the things that are not academic exercises anymore; they're reality, and that's what's driving Californians out of the state. Now, what is the legislature doing? What is the governor doing? Well, I think their problem is that they're doing things, but in a bad way. And so they're trying to solve these things in multiple ways, but in part it's more regulation. In part is they think they need more revenue, and to solve all these problems and create all these programs, and then of course to create all these programs you need more taxes, you need more fees, and you need more revenue. We right now, when you look at the budget, we are living in a very artificial world. So we shouldn't be making massive policy changes in a time when nothing is really real. We have federal stimulus that has come to the state. We have massive amounts of money coming to Washington, D.C. And then, of course, right now, the economy is out of balance. You have massive government interventions in the labor market and the real estate market and everything else. So to make massive wholesale changes in policy at a time when we don't know, when things haven't stabilized, we're probably going to have a lot of unintended consequences. And so that is a huge challenge for us, is to get the legislature to kind of pump the brakes a little bit and evaluate things in a more realistic way. Now, of course, you've got a supermajority of Democrats who want to spend a whole lot of money, and that's the problem, right? The governor and Sacramento Democrats, they define success based on how much money they spend, right? So if you think about it, right, the governor announces $12 billion for homelessness, $2.4 billion for this, $1 billion here, $500 million there. He's pretending to be Oprah, and he's going out there and he's like, you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car, right? But no one, well, at least we are asking, and myself, is that we have to, what are the metrics? Are we getting results? And this is what everyday Californians live with, right? Are things getting better? And they're not. And so when it comes to homelessness or the housing crisis, when we talk about CEQA and housing, the governor's talking about, like, we want a bunch of infill development. None of us are opposed to infill development, except for infill development is extremely expensive and you don't get enough housing. We want large developments. When we talk about homelessness, we spend $12 billion, we're going to spend $12 billion over the next 2 years on homelessness. $12 billion with a B. And is it getting better? Supply chain. We haven't invested in the supply chain in decades. And people wondering why we can't get containers and products from the Port of Long Beach in LA to the stores. You talk about wildfires and wildfire prevention. We haven't done vegetation management in decades. But now the governor agrees with us that we need to do vegetation management, even though 10 years ago we were saying the same thing. When I worked for Congressman McCarthy, that was what we were talking about. We had a fire, the Erskine fire, that at that time was massive, but now it pales in comparison to the fires that we have. When we talk about drought and the fact that we have invested in water storage and that there is no additional money for water storage in this budget, right? So the question for us in California is, are we doing the basics right? And the answer is no. So that is all driving Californians out of the state. And of course, when we talk about, so as we talk about all these crises, what is the legislature doing? They're pushing single-payer healthcare, right? So at a time when taxes are high, businesses are getting crushed, businesses are closing, people are worried about their future, they want to take over healthcare and they want to impose $163 billion in new taxes, right? How does that balance out, right? So they're out of touch. You see that in the surveys that are coming out now, where the governor is creating. He's very good at creating political headlines, right? But right now, Californians have cut through the noise. They're seeing all these slick, press conferences, and they're seeing all these announcements. But at the end of the day, they're like, yeah, but you're not solving anything. So that's what we're trying to deal with. So when we talk about what's going to happen this year and how we're going to stop things, we were successful in stopping AB 1400, the government-run single-payer healthcare, in part because I think the elected officials now are realizing that a lot of damage is being done. Now the pendulum is swinging. The public is moving, or it wants balance. We are in a political year. It is an election year. We have new districts. A lot of these elected officials are now running in districts where people don't know who they are. And I was told a long time ago in politics, you have one chance to make a good first impression. And so do you want to be the elected official that raised a bunch of taxes, that made your healthcare worse, that couldn't fix homelessness, that didn't build water storage, that couldn't fix wildfires, that didn't exercise any political will to solve any problems facing the state of California? I probably don't think that's what their strategy is going to be, right? They want to be able to talk about what they did. And so that is going to give us a window to be able to cobble together a coalition to do some things. Now, I'm an eternal optimist, and that's what my optimistic view is. But I'm also sensitive to the fact that structure dictates behavior. And this legislature has a supermajority of Democrats. There is a sizable progressive wing of that party that is driving the conversation. And so that is going to be the challenge, is to be able to articulate and focus the public on those basic things. We're not asking the state government to do a lot. We're just asking them to do certain things well. And if you look at how they've handled unemployment benefits and EDD, it is the biggest failure. I used to say the DMV and high-speed rail were our biggest failures as the state of California, but then EDD decided to take the cake and say, look, hold my beer, I'm ready to show them all up. And so that's the thing. So the more we can focus the public on, look, Sacramento needs to focus and focus on the things that really are important. There are social causes, there are certain agendas that liberals want, but at the end of the day, we got to get the basics right. I will be remiss not talking about energy. I know one of the reports was whether the California should follow, what New York is doing on energy. California, Kern County produces 75% of the oil in California, and even that is not enough. We still import a tremendous amount of energy. oil to the state. And if you eliminated the entire oil industry in California, one super tanker coming over from overseas will replace that supply. And the thing, and so when you think about that, it's that Californians are how do you power our state? We're the 5th largest economy in the world if you look at our economy as a state. So we have to power it. Like the idea that, I don't know if you remember during the last electricity blackout, you had DWP in LA sending out messages to their customers, telling them to not plug in their cars, to unplug everything, to not power their house. Just imagine that. An agency of local government telling people to not power their life. I mean, this is insane. And so we need to figure out how to power our state. And look, oil and natural gas are going to be part of it. And I'm technology agnostic. Look, Kern County, not only are we known for our oil and agriculture, we're also the #1 solar energy producing county in America, and then we're the #1 wind energy producing county in America. So I'm not anti-renewable. I'm just saying that we got to do it all. There is no way that you're going to power not only our state but our country on just one thing. And so that's really important. Energy policy, I think, is simmering. The issue is simmering. It doesn't get a lot of attention right now, but it will, because the policies that are being imposed on the state of California are going to create scarcity by choice. And that's going to create a lot of problems because those on the lower income spectrum are going to be hurt the most. So the last question I think Tim asked me to talk about was, what would I do if you made me king for a day? So if I were Gavin Newsom, I'd make me king forever, right? But I'm not Gavin Newsom, so the thing that I that's important if I were in charge is that, again, ignore all the noise and focus on the basics. I think that is critical. So, like you named the crises I've listed on homelessness. Focus on the root causes. We have a lot of broken systems: foster care system, criminal justice system, the prison system, our education system, our substance abuse, the lack of substance abuse treatment and mental health treatment programs. Well, we'll fix those, because if we don't fix those, all those broken systems are just going to feed into the homelessness space, and then all we're doing is funding the shelters and structure, but we're not fixing anything. We're just throwing more money into the system. Drought, water storage, housing, we got waive CEQA and streamline the process. Supply chain, we got to invest into the ports, maybe build a couple of inland ports. We need to expand trucking capacity and rail capacity on electricity, enhance the grid, allow us to produce more electricity and power. At nighttime, from 4 to 9, we're importing electricity made from natural gas and coal from the Midwest. No progressive liberal ever wants to tell you that. Right? When the sun goes down, where do we get electricity? It's powered from the Midwest by clean coal and natural gas. So when you're doing your laundry at night and your kids are doing homework and watching TV, well, who's powering the state? On public safety, we got to bring back accountability, and then we need permanent tax relief. I'm going to end with this because I think Howard Jarvis can talk about this. But everyone wants to talk about the gas tax holiday and all these temporary things, right? And look, if you give me a choice of a gas tax holiday or no gas tax holiday, well, I'd be supportive of a gas tax holiday. But if my choice is temporary tax relief or permanent tax relief, well, I'll take permanent all day long, because that's going to drive economic activity, and that's what's going to generate and generate prosperity and move our economy forward. And my other thing, if I was king for a day, is I would move our state away from static scoring. The way that the LAO does it, we had this fight when I was working for Bill Thomas about the CBO and how we score bills. And I know I'm taking time, I'm sorry, guys, but this is important, is that the way the state analyzes tax credits and tax cuts in our state is that it's always a loss of revenue to the state. You know this because you're elected, right? So if I cut taxes in the state, which we all know we need to do, we all know it's going to generate economic activity, right? It brings people to the state, will be more attractive, right? But they only look at it from how much revenue will be lost. So if that's the way we evaluate every tax proposal in the state of California, well, there is no incentive for the legislature to cut taxes. But we all know that the economy is a very dynamic place. So if I do a tax credit for a certain industry, or for manufacturing, or for businesses, or for art research and development, or just lower the corporate tax rate in general, right? I'm going to bring more economic activity. People are going to buy things, they're going to sell things, they're going to invest in things, and that's going to be good for the economy. So we need to reduce the corporate tax rate, we need to reduce the personal income tax, and those are all things that are necessary to actually bring people back to California. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll answer any questions you got.
So what do I vote with Assembly Fong for governor? I'd like to now introduce Scott Kaufman, who is our next speaker. Scott is a legislative director for the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. For over 35 years, they've been the legal and political watchdog of Prop 13 and the staunch defenders of California taxpayers. So we owe a great deal of thanks to them. Prior to joining the Howard Jarvis team, Scott served as the director of the Education and Workforce Development Task Force at the American Legislative Exchange Council, and he also served as the opinion editor for the Southern California News Group papers. So please welcome Scott Kaufman.
Hello, everybody. Tim asked me to come talk about whether or not I think high taxes are driving people out of California. Yes, thank you for your time. It was a pleasure. No, I mean, yes, the answer is yes, but I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's obvious, right? Among, the highest single income tax bracket in the country, among the highest sales tax, if not the highest, among the highest gas tax. I always say I'm pretty sure they're the highest, but I always say among the highest because New York likes to compete with us on these sorts of things. So it may have changed overnight while I wasn't looking. We do this back and forth about who can raise taxes the highest. The only tax that we're not among the highest, top 5, top 10, is property taxes, thanks to Prop 13 capping it. But even then, we're middle of the pack. We're not even the lowest. We're still in the middle. So, are we taxed too much? Yes, obviously. And, we have the evidence to prove it, as we've, mentioned the outward migration. We lost a congressional seat for the first time in the state's history. Since statehood, we lost a congressional seat. And that's because more people left California than came in for the first time ever. And really, I think the numbers are even more alarming than they're made out to be, because for a long time, the naysayers kind of said, well, we're still positive. We're still positive because of international migration. More folks are coming in from other countries, and that's giving us a positive migration rate. But when you looked at folks coming to our state versus leaving our state from other states, and to other states and from other states, more folks were leaving our state for other states than coming in from other states to our state. And I think that's the more alarming number because, on my mom's side, I'm a fifth-generation Californian, but on my dad's side, he's from South Dakota, born and raised in South Dakota, grew up on a homestead. And when he was a young man, California was the golden state. It was the streets were paved with gold. It was where everyone aspired to move. It was Horace Greeley said, "Go west, young man, and grow up with the country." And for him, that was California. And the fact that we now have more people leaving this state than coming in tells you that for the rest of this country, California is no longer that promise. It's no longer the promise of a better opportunity, the land of opportunity. I mean, we were the land of opportunity in the land of opportunity, and it's no longer true. And so, as Assemblyman said, I don't think we're going to see meaningful, broad-based tax reform in the near future, but we got to keep fighting. There's an issue, though, with all the good folks leaving, it makes it hard to get that stuff done. So if you're thinking about leaving, don't. You need to keep voting. I was born here, I was raised here, and I hope to die here. But I need the rest of you to stay here with me. And I think that's really it. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to be respectful of your time, and I always like answering questions more than I like pontificating. So I'll stop there. But are taxes driving people out of this state? Of course they are. But we have to stay and fight it out if we want if that to change. So thank you for your time.
Scott. Our last, or I should say our third, because nobody wants to be last or final, I wouldn't think. Speaker of this panel is Loren Kaye, who is president of the California Foundation for Commerce and Education, which is the think tank for the business community. He's devoted his career to developing, analyzing, and implementing California public policy issues with an emphasis on improving the state's business and economic climate. He at one time was an appointee to the state's Little Hoover Commission, and he's held senior positions for Governors Pete Wilson and George Dickmajian. Please welcome Loren Kaye.
It's a wide room. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. It's really great to be here and see some people I haven't seen in a really long time. This program reminds me something. I think Winston Churchill said it, that everybody so far, everybody's pretty much said all that's needed to be said on this subject, but I haven't had a chance to say it. So thanks for. And no, I'm not gonna get into really a lot of the substance that was already discussed, because I couldn't say it better than Vince Fong. Talking about the taxes, I'm not an expert like you are, but I really want to call your attention, if you haven't seen the paper that Wayne and Kerry did, it's really an excellent paper. And it's the sort of thing that I wish that I had written or had commissioned, because it covers all of the issues almost all of the issues, and I'm going to get to that, almost all of the issues that are key to California's prosperity and how they're not being addressed. And it starts with, frankly, my hobby horse, which is the Cal Exodus. And the way I look at it is that this is a case where the residents are voting with their feet. That this is it's very hard, tangible evidence that things are not how they should be. Now, we've been following this for a number of years. I'm going to speak for just a few minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit about some research that we've done over the past several years on public opinion. Then I'm going to talk about one more issue that I'd like you to think about and to grab onto. We've done a Cal Chamber poll for the last 6 or 7 years, and we've been following. We talk a lot about public policy issues, business climate issues, the things that you would think that we talk about, but we also ask general kind of attitudinal question by voters to see how they're feeling about the state, and it reveals what you've seen in this paper. We asked, for example, do you believe that earning enough income to enjoy a middle-class lifestyle is becoming almost impossible in my part of California? 85% agree with that statement, including about 90% in the Bay Area. I know, big surprise, but that's a big number, and it's been growing over the years. As far as you know, have any major employers or businesses left your community in recent years to relocate to another state? Almost half the voters say that they do know of a business in their area, and particularly, again, in the Bay Area. In the past year, has anyone you know personally moved out of California because of job loss or cost of living? 44% of people know somebody. I couldn't have said that a few years ago. Now, of course, I live in Sacramento. It's a lower cost part of the state, but that's to me, that's kind of shocking, because I'm used to, obviously, people moving into California and not moving out. Do you think the American dream, that if you work hard, you'll get ahead, still holds true in California? 37% said, yeah, it still holds true. 12% say, well, it never held true. 51%, a majority, said it once held true. It is not true today. And in just 1 year, we asked that question in 2020. In just 1 year, that's flipped. In just this last year, that's a majority. The American dream does not hold true anymore in California. And then my family would have a better future if we left California. This one breaks my heart. Almost half of voters agree with that. And then this one, I consider a bellwether. About a quarter, a little more than a quarter of our survey sample are parents with kids at home, like me. And so we asked, and we've asked this since 2015, agree or disagree? My children would have a better future if they left California. 62% agree with that statement, which is, I think that's, to me, that's the most stunning finding in the poll. And that has been over the last 4 or 5 years, that's pretty much jumped up and stayed at that level. So this, to me, what's important about this is that we've been doing this for a number of years, and it's just been very, very consistent. We ask these questions of likely voters. And it really supports what they found about this Cal exit. It's a real thing. People feel it. They may act on it if they get the opportunity. And I think it was, I'm not sure who said it, but what's really concerning to me, and we talk a lot about businesses leaving California, and I'm not going to say that's not an issue, because it is, but we also create a lot of businesses in California. Businesses are created, they go away, they merge, they're formed, and on the margin, we obviously hate to lose them. I'm from the Chamber of Commerce, and so we want businesses to grow and prosper in California. But it's more of a concern to me, frankly, about the individuals leaving California, because that's who our businesses are. They're without a workforce, without consumers, without a strong, growing and prosperous society. We don't have business. It doesn't start with businesses. It starts with our community and our state and our society. That's what concerns me, and that's why I really appreciate the direction that you started that paper with. So I'm gonna end on an issue that was not covered in your paper, but it's something that I think is is fundamental to our success, and that's quality education. Because that's where the success of the state begins, is with, and that's where not just prosperity, but success, equality, social justice, the whole thing. It begins with education, and we've taken a step backward over the last couple of years, as I'm sure you can all appreciate, even if you don't have kids in school. They found that students in elementary school have fallen months behind in English and math. But even before the onset of the pandemic, according to the national assessments, the proficiency rates for California Black and Hispanic students, who together account for 60% of public school enrollments in the state. I'll say that again. Black and Hispanic kids are 60% of the enrollment in the state. Their proficiency rates were 1/2 of what white and Asian American students. Those racial gaps are growing wider. There's no trajectory in place where they're coming together, and it's no better through income level. Again, it's a different 60%, but 60% of public school students qualify for free or reduced price meals, which is a proxy for poverty or near poverty. 60% of public school students. Of those students, only about a fifth, 20% of low-income students meet or exceed proficiency for 4th or 8th grade math or reading. These are measures that were taken before the pandemic. These are 60% of the public school students. The overwhelming, I'm going to bring it back home, the overwhelming majority of these students eventually will work in small or large California businesses. That's the point. But we're not serving them, and we're not even approaching serving them. So for employers, for my constituency, it's an existential issue. We need to improve the success of California students. For my constituency, for success, for businesses, for employers, and obviously for our social fabric. We have a commitment, as I know you do, to social cohesion and economic opportunity, and the educational attainment is the through line for that. So I'll just add that to your very long and diverse agenda, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Loren. This is now our question and answer session, part of the session. And Scott, you said you like answering questions, so we'll see if we can get the first one to you. Do we have, I guess Tim's just going to give you the microphone. If you have, raise your hand if you have a question.
Yes, I have a question right here.
Assemblyman Fong, are there any Democrats who privately say to you in the Assembly that they agree with some of the points you make?
Yes. There are a number of Democrats that will agree on housing. So the coalitions form depending on the issue. So on housing, there definitely is a contingent that would reform CEQA, that would streamline the process. I would want a more widespread CEQA streamlining, and they would be more narrow. But again, is there the political will? On energy, same thing. On on homelessness and other things, it's like we want to audit homelessness funding. That would be the minimum you would do with the amount of money that we're spending. I mean, the LAO came out with an analysis saying that we need to not create more programs, but make sure that the programs that were created are working. I mean, not rocket science, but you've got certain departments that over the last year has seen a 1,000% increase in their budget. 1,000%. There's no way that they can function and absorb that amount of money and deliver the results that they need. So yes, the answer is that there are Democrats that agree. Now, peeling them off and the political dynamics within the legislature, that's difficult. And so that's the broader challenge, is whether we can get them to actually exercise political will.
Just to follow up, your last point, I'm not going to ask any names, although that might be fun. Not for you, but some of us. But is there a core that would give you enough optimism, give you some optimism of who are silently agreeing with you? Or is it just too small to mean anything?
Well, I mean, look, from a math standpoint, right, I need 41 votes. There's 19 Republicans. The moderate Dem wing ranges. I would say that there's probably 6 to 9 true moderates on a wide range of issues. Some will be on certain things, but from a true mod standpoint, there's probably 6 to 9. So let's say let's be conservative and say 6, right? So there's 25 votes. So I still need 16 votes to get, and then of course if the speaker engages and Tim knows this from working in the building, right? The speaker controls everything. He controls your committees, he controls your office, he controls everything. So if you want to stick it to the speaker, you could, but you ain't going to have a lot of committees, and your office is going to be really small. And so that's the challenge. Now 1,400 was a different dynamic, right? I think that everyone, if you're going to ask a member to walk the plank and sacrifice themselves for some policy that they knew didn't work, was completely untested. It was going to raise a bunch of taxes. I think that was a bridge too far. Shockingly, right? I mean, there was actually a line that they couldn't get to, but so that's, and there was actually two other bills that failed. One was to ban the gas combustion engine, that didn't make it through, and then there was one that that was trying to change, like you couldn't evict someone for non-payment for 5 years. And so those three bills failed. So there's a line. It's just, it's just getting people to understand what's happening.
For anyone up there, we all agree that COVID was a change agent for a lot of things, education and many other parts of our society. So what's going to happen over the next few weeks or months if the Russians and the Ukrainians can't get along and we have open warfare, and then our energy supply and possibly even hacking of the power grid and all of that? So we might have another big shock coming, huh? I mean, does anybody want to comment on that? Because I don't know anything about it.
Wayne? I'm going to put it on Wayne.
The Dow had a, almost 700-point collapse today? Yeah, today. It was a really, really bad day on Wall Street, and I think that kind of says it all. And actually there was firing over the border. I've been here, so that would be problematic. It'd probably be more problematic for Europe than it would be for us per se, but it's geopolitical risk is out there, and it is a real threat to the economy and a threat to the recovery, and it will not help inflation. So all of that's, but that's for our topic, right? California doesn't really impact us, because everyone's boat is going down. So there's not a particular risk to California, except for what the Assemblyman was talking about. We get so much of our oil here from overseas, to the extent the shipping lanes are impacted or things of that nature. But it's a scary thing, but it doesn't really impact the migration.
So you have to disconnect your Tesla and you can't get home from work because your Tesla's not charged, then that's going to be a change agent, right?
Well, yes.
People are going to get pissed off then, right? And maybe we'll benefit, huh? Okay.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to weigh in on that one.
I don't know who this would go to, but with green energy, we always talk about what we're going to produce, and like magically, it just occurs in the form of solar panels and windmills. So I always wonder about the question of the sources, the minerals, how they get the minerals out of the ground, how they separate and process all that stuff, where it comes from, where does California produce any? Does the United States produce it?
I know a little about that, not enough to maybe even open my mouth, but I'm going to anyway. A lot of it comes from countries that don't have representative democratic governments, and I think we've all heard about the slave labor going on in China. A lot of it comes from there. So I read recently, I'm a little reluctant to say this because I might get this wrong, but there might be some lithium available in the western United States, possibly in California, but it's a dirty business. This stuff doesn't just come out of the ground, pristine. It's not, it leaves a really serious scar on the earth. So we all have lithium in our phones for the batteries and on small scales. But we're talking about industrial scale batteries for renewable energy. There's a lot more that's got to come out of the ground. Is anybody else?
I would just add that, when President Biden was talking about his green agenda, I think there was an acknowledgement that there wasn't enough minerals and products to support what I think he's looking to expand to. So I think that that's a huge issue. Supply chain is another thing that we have to acknowledge as well, right? If we're going to get products from overseas, right? If we don't figure out our supply chain issues, we got a massive problem. But there's no way that you can power the economy just on green energy. I mean, it's just reality. And so we're going to need some. And I think if battery technology matures, it would be a game changer that would probably make the renewable space a little bit more robust. But we're not getting off of oil and natural gas anytime soon. And the last time I checked, plastic is still used in a lot of those things. So those are petroleum byproducts.
We still need a question for Scott. I don't want him to leave disappointed.
Right over here, maybe we might have.
Okay.
For Scott. Go ahead.
I don't have a microphone. We can hear you. We can hear you.
You're getting my 10,000 steps in today.
I'll give it right back. Scott, the Howard Jarvis group, you're defenders of Prop 13, of course. And what do you see the erosion in it over the next near term? And will there be a bifurcation of commercial property away from residential?
Can I also add that you give an update on your initiative that you're working on?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess the big question is, what is going on with Prop 13? I would say that Prop 13 is held strong. It's continuing to hold strong. We're almost to 50 years now of Prop 13. They try again and again and again to dismantle Prop 13, and they fail again and again and again. I think that the biggest threat in recent memory was Prop 15, the attempt to split off commercial property from residential. It failed. It was closer than we would have liked, but we also think that was probably one of the best election cycles the opposition ever had and ever will have to dismantle Prop 13, and they failed. Prop 13 still enjoys broad support in this state. There are other ways that they're undermining it. There was a court decision a couple years ago called Upland. We just refer to it as Upland. That said that folks bringing initiatives as private citizens can lower the two-thirds majority for tax increases down to just a simple majority. So we're seeing a lot of abuse with that. The business groups are working on an initiative fix for that they just introduced recently, and they're trying to gather signatures for. And then there's our initiative that we're working on. Prop 19 last year made a couple of changes to property taxes, Prop 13 specifically. It broadened portability. It allowed more folks to move and take their Prop 13 with them, which is something that we're supportive of. But it also made changes to the intergenerational transfer. For 30 years when property was inherited, the primary residence and up to $1 million in assessed value of other property, it was not reassessed on inheritance. Prop 19 changed that. And so now if you don't move in and claim it as your primary residence within a year, if the inheritor doesn't move in within a year, and even then, if the property has a valuation of higher than base year plus $1 million, they will see a reassessment, which could be pretty sizable. The $1 million in other property completely went away. So we're talking, small businesses, rental properties, vacation homes, farm, ag land. Well, ag land that's not for cultivation or processing, storage, that sort of stuff for agricultural uses, could see very sizable tax increases. I had a call from a guy just yesterday who got one of these kind of letters. His mother died in March of last year, and he got the letter from the assessor saying, I need you to make a decision. Are you moving in or not? Because if you move in, your property taxes are going to be $16,000 a year, and if you don't move in, they're going to be $26,000 a year. What do you want to do? And he said, I don't think I can do it either way. So we have an initiative. It's called the Repeal the Death Tax Initiative. You can Google it. It pops up. We're going to restore that intergenerational transfer so folks can inherit property without getting taxed out of it, which is the whole point of Prop 13, right, is creating a tax code that doesn't tax people out of their homes.
We have one more?
Yep.
Can I just add a really important point is that I know a lot of people will have a debate on whether we should use the initiative process to make policy, but structure dictates behavior, and if we're going to make policy, we should use the initiative process to make good policy. So the Repeal the Death Tax is an important initiative. The Chamber is also going forward and collecting signatures on PAGA reform and all these shakedown lawsuits where they're hitting small businesses and immigrant-owned businesses and with extortions, with frivolous claims of wage and hour and everything else, and paycheck stubs and everything else. So we're finally going on the offense to actually implement positive policy, and so those initiatives are really important. And maybe that's a different conference or a different conversation, but just want to highlight that.
Well, I know we're not finished, but I just want to say this has been a really excellent conference, and I appreciate the expertise that's been brought here. One of the areas that didn't receive quite as much of attention was our discussion about education, particularly K through 12. And those numbers that were brought out earlier about proficiency, first of all, how many of you would be happy if your children or grandchildren were noted to be proficient? Because it's not real good, You want it to be a lot better than proficient. And those numbers of proficiency of 20 or 30%, that's just like borderline educated. Personally, I think until we get the parents of those children to vote differently, nothing's going to change. I just don't see how that system, I want to know whether you think there's any way in which the teachers' unions are going to fix it, or the SEIU, or anyone else, but I think really the solution to the problem is to make the parents aware of what's going on. I can't believe there are so many millions of people living in the city, and the kids are getting a terrible education. They're being measured, and they're inadequate, and they seem to put up with it. So am I wrong?
Loren spoke on education, so I'm going to turn that over to him.
Well, no, I was going to say. I already said something. I was going through the pandemic and going through the school reopenings and all the fights. The CTA is extremely powerful, and now, but the thing is that now parents are waking up, and now you're seeing this counterbalance. Now, how far that goes and how much momentum we can get is one thing. But I just want to juxtapose what Loren said, because what Loren said is very important, because look at it, compare what Loren said to the budget, right? The governor, when he announces his budget, touts per pupil spending of $12,000 to $14,000 per pupil. Could be higher, actually, if you count in the federal side. So he touts how much he spends for schools, right? But then you compare it to the results. Compare it to and so we need to refocus the education debate on, are we actually helping the kids? Go ahead, Loren.
Well, as far as what's actionable, it totally comes down to voters exercising their influence either in who they elect or if there are ballot measures that affect it, because the legislature is not part of the critical path there, and it's just not going to happen through the legislature unless there's a lot of different legislators, and so that's. It's up to the voters, and I think we've seen in other states and even in San Francisco recently that motivated parents and people who are supportive of parents, like grandparents and friends of parents, can make a difference. And I think that's there's a little window that was opened up horribly by the pandemic, but now it's up to a lot of folks to keep that window open.
And I think that's what he was alluding to, that the pandemic was a great accelerator in a lot of things. There needed to be changes in the education space. The pandemic forced it, and now we're reevaluating the education debate.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.